I can still hear the echo of my boss's voice that morning, calm, confident, rehearsed, the kind of tone people use when they know they're about to burn a room down and still expect applause. He stood at the head of the conference table, the words "revised bonus framework" glowing on the screen behind him. I didn't think much of it at first. It was late February, quarter's end, that time of year when everyone starts calculating vacations and payout numbers. Mine was supposed to be $114,000, my slice of the $456,000 pool the leadership had promised to distribute among our project teams. But then he said it. We've adjusted the KPI baselines retroactively to align with executive performance standards. Retroactively, the word dropped like a stone in my gut. Around me, chairs shifted. Someone coughed. I watched the spreadsheet update in real time. Our achieved percentages flickering downward like a stock crash. My 117% target achievement slid to 62%. The projected payout column turned gray, then 0. I looked up. He was smiling. To keep things transparent, he continued, I've asked Daniel here to read the new metrics aloud. Daniel? Me. I'd built those reports. I knew exactly how many millions my team had brought in, how many client renewals we'd secured, how many process saves we'd delivered. Yet there I was, holding a printout that told a different story. His story. Operations efficiency, 48%, I read, the paper trembling slightly in my hand. Client retention, 59. A few quiet laughs, not cruel, just disbelieving. When I got to total bonus eligibility, $0, he cut in. Exactly, he said, pacing slowly. And that's why this quarter, the executive committee will redirect the entire pool toward leadership retention to ensure stability at the top. He said it like he was doing us a favor. No one moved. You could hear the HVAC hum. Then he clapped his hands once. All right, team, let's use this as motivation. Remember, efficiency is the real bonus. Laughter this time, forced, nervous. A few eyes darted to me. They knew. I'd been the guy who told them the formula was locked, that leadership couldn't touch it once the fiscal calendar closed. I'd even pulled the section from the compensation policy once to prove it. But that morning, every rule bent to his signature. When the meeting broke, I stayed seated. He lingered too, of course. Predators like to watch the light go out. Rough quarter, he said, hand on my shoulder. Don't take it personally. Numbers don't lie. I looked up at him and smiled just enough to hide the tremor in my jaw. No, I said quietly, but people who write them sometimes do. He didn't catch it, or pretended not to. He walked out, humming. That's the moment the war began. It wasn't rage. Rage burns too fast. What I felt was slower, cold, deliberate. I opened the file on my laptop and started scrolling through the audit trail. Every metric revision was logged with a timestamp. I found one from 3 nights earlier, 2:17 a.m. User E. Mercer admin, my boss. He'd changed the baseline KPIs from closed accounts to closed accounts excluding renewals. That single line erased half a year of work, and because he had executive credentials, it passed validation automatically. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. If he could rewrite the rules at 2 a.m., he could do it again, but he'd made a mistake, a small one, invisible to him but blindingly clear to me. Every edit above $250,000 required secondary confirmation from the compensation committee. The system hadn't logged one. He hadn't followed protocol. That night, while everyone else was home trying to forget the meeting, I was still in the office. The cleaning crew moved around me like ghosts. I pulled every policy document I could find. HR compliance, finance governance, SOX control lists. I read until my eyes burned. By 1 a.m., I'd found what I needed. Section 7.4, KPI alterations and retroactive adjustments. It was one paragraph, dry and technical, but it might as well have been a loaded gun. Any modification to incentive metrics affecting aggregate payouts above $250,000 shall be subject to compensation committee approval, recorded via signed authorization prior to implementation. I printed it, slipped it into a folder, and locked it in my drawer. The next morning I arrived early. He was already there, of course. Coffee, cufflinks, and that faint cologne that always reminded me of boardrooms and cheap victories. He looked up from his laptop. "Daniel, don't tell me you're still brooding over the bonus. You'll get another shot next quarter." I set the folder on his desk, opened it to section 7.4, and said, "Just checking. Do we have a signed authorization from the committee for last week's metric revision?" The pause that followed told me everything. He blinked once, then smiled. "You don't need to worry about that level of documentation." "Of course," I said. "Just verifying for finance. They're running the closeout reports?" His jaw tightened. "If finance asks, tell them the committee reviewed it verbally." "Verbal authorization doesn't meet section 7.4. He froze for half a second, just long enough for me to see the flicker behind his eyes. "Daniel," he said finally, his tone shifting, "you're smart. Don't make this political. Learn to pick your battles." He left me standing there, folder in hand. But here's the thing about picking battles. Sometimes you don't get to. Sometimes they pick you. That afternoon, HR added a performance calibration meeting to my calendar. No context, no invite list, just a time slot, 4 p.m. I knew what that meant, pretext for a demotion or a performance plan. Fine. If he wanted to play corporate war, he'd chosen the wrong soldier. I spent the rest of the day backing up every audit log, every timestamp, every email header showing when those KPIs had changed. I encrypted it, stored it on a personal drive, and left a single breadcrumb on the company server. A harmless system note tagged to the next payroll cycle. Per section 7.4, confirmation pending. Do not finalize payouts until authorization logged. That note was invisible to most users, but not to payroll. And there was one person there who never ignored a red flag. Her name was AITA. Quiet, meticulous, the kind of person no one notices until something breaks. She noticed. When the next payroll run began, she sent me a short message. "Your flag stopped the exec payout batch. You want to tell me why?" I typed back. "Because if he pushes it through, he's committing fraud." There was a long pause before her next line appeared. "Then I guess I should keep it stopped." That's when I realized I wasn't alone in this war, and he had no idea who was about to beat him. He thought rules were for the people below him. That's what power does. It blinds you to the fact that rules don't bend for rank. They bend for leverage. When Aisha froze the payout batch, it bought me 48 hours. 48 hours to turn suspicion into evidence. That's all I needed. At 6 a.m. the next morning, the office was still half dark, monitors blinking in sleep mode. I poured burnt coffee from the communal pot and opened the compensation governance archive. Every company has one. 99% of employees never touch it. I was the 1% that did. Section by section, I built a map. Each rule was like a bone, and together they formed a skeleton of the system he'd tried to manipulate. The most important ones were buried deep. 7.4. Retroactive KPI changes. He'd violated that already. 9.2. Executive multiplier cap. Anything above 1.25x required written board consent. 11.1. SOX control. 19b. Mandatory audit flag on unauthorized formula modification. 3 bombs, all waiting for the right spark. At 8:30, the office began to fill. He came in last, as always. Designer coat over one arm, latte in the other. He looked well-rested, too well-rested. He must have assumed the system glitch was nothing serious. "Morning," he said, gliding past my desk. "Morning," I replied, eyes on my screen. I waited until he'd settled into his glass-walled office before sending the first email. Subject: KPI revision documentation, section 7.4 confirmation. To E. Mercer, CC, Finance Ops. Eric, Please confirm signed Compensation Committee authorization for KPI modifications implemented Feb 21, Ref. Audit ID 3917. As these adjustments impact aggregate payouts, O250K, Section 7.4 requires written record prior to finalization. Daniel, I kept the tone neutral, no accusation, no emotion, just process language, the kind that HR and finance can't ignore. He didn't reply, but 10 minutes later I watched him storm into HR with his phone in hand. Good. That was the point. Once he responded verbally, HR became a witness. At noon, AITA messaged me again. He tried to override the lock, claimed executive privilege. I refused. I stared at the screen. What did he do after? Asked who flagged it. I didn't answer. I felt a pulse of gratitude and fear for her. He wasn't the type to forget a challenge. At 2 p.m., my performance calibration meeting alert popped up. Room 4C. No attendees listed. When I walked in, HR's director sat at the table with a folder. He looked uncomfortable. Daniel, Eric asked us to discuss some concerns about your conduct. He began. There's mention of unauthorized system activity. I cut him off. You mean the system flag tied to Section 7.4? His eyes flickered. You're aware of that? I'm the one who created it. To prevent an unapproved bonus payout from breaching SOX controls. He blinked again. Slowly. I see. Do you have documentation? I slid a flash drive across the table. Audit logs, time-stamped edits, missing authorization signatures, control IDs. It's all there. He didn't touch the drive, but his expression changed, a tiny exhale that told me I'd just shifted the conversation from disciplinary to defensive. Daniel, he said finally, voice lower now, you're saying Eric altered compensation formulas without approval. I'm saying the logs show he did. Whether that's fraud or incompetence isn't my call. When I left the room, my hands were still shaking. Not from fear, from focus. I spent the rest of the afternoon locking down every piece of proof I could find. Payroll exports, procurement receipts showing cost savings he'd labeled inefficiencies, client satisfaction emails confirming deliverables he'd claimed we'd missed. Every file went into an encrypted folder labeled Policy Ref Nutcher 19B Backup. That night, the office lights went out one by one until it was just me and the city outside, skyscrapers flickering like data streams. I drafted a single surgical email to the one address that mattered most, not to HR, not to legal, but to the Compensation Committee's external auditor. Subject: Control 19B irregularity, potential unauthorized KPI modification per section, 11.1, SOX. Please note possible breach linked to payroll batch, Ref 145. Details enclosed under encrypted audit ID. Recommend pre-approval verification before next disbursement. Anonymous internal source, anonymous, but traceable enough to trigger protocol. Once that message hit their system, the clock started. External auditors have 72 hours to log an incident report. That meant by Friday morning the board would know something was wrong, and he'd have no idea why. At home that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept picturing Aisha's face when she said she'd refused his override. She was taking a risk bigger than mine. Payroll specialists don't get glory. They get blame. If this went sideways, she'd be the first one he'd target. I drafted another message. If anything happens, if he tries to pressure you, send me a blank email with subject AIM control check. I'll know what it means, she replied a minute later. Got it. Thursday came. He didn't speak to me all day. His office door stayed closed, blinds drawn. The rumor mill started churning, whispers about audit delays and bonus disputes, system errors. At 5 p.m., my inbox pinged. Aisha again. He called me into his office, told me to unlock the batch, said it was urgent. I told him it violates control protocol. He said if I didn't comply, I'd be written up for insubordination. I typed back, "What did you do?" I told him to put it in writing. That was her genius. Once it's in writing, it's evidence. He never sent that email. Instead, he forwarded a payback clarification memo to HR claiming temporary KPI realignment approved via executive review. I almost laughed. That phrase, executive review, doesn't exist anywhere in company policy. He was fabricating terms now. Desperation. At 9:40 p.m., long after he'd gone home, I saw the final piece click into place. The audit log updated again. User, E. Mercer, admin, action formula adjustment. Field bonus multiplier from 1.25. 1.75. That was it. The smoking gun. He wasn't just redirecting our money. He was inflating his own. I exported the log, sealed it with a checksum signature, and uploaded it to the same encrypted drive. Then, for good measure, I wrote one line in the audit system. Comments. Per section 19B, unauthorized modification detected. Flag raised for verification. The system pinged the external auditor automatically. When I shut down my computer, it was almost midnight. The building was empty again, except for the hum of servers and the faint whir of the HVAC. I stood there a long moment, looking out at the skyline. Tomorrow morning, when he pressed approve, the system would do exactly what it was designed to do, protect the company from him. He'd turned a bonus into a battlefield, but I'd just mined the ground beneath his feet, and by the time he realized it, it would already be too late. Friday started like any other, except for the silence, that unnatural, tight kind of quiet that sits in an office when everyone knows something is about to happen, but no one knows what. By 9 a.m., the hum of conversation had been replaced with cautious whispers. Monitors flickered with frozen spreadsheets, and the Slack status of half the finance team read, "In meeting." Everyone could feel the tension building. Everyone except Eric Mercer, my boss, who strolled in wearing a new navy suit and a grin too bright for a man under audit. "Morning, team," he said, clapping his hands once. "System hiccups are resolved. We'll push bonuses through by noon." Noon. That was when the trap would spring. He thought the system glitch was just payroll lag. He didn't realize the external auditors were already watching every keystroke in real time. Aisha messaged me privately at 9:12. He's running manual verification on the batch now, trying to override Control 19B. Can he? I typed back. Not without dual approval. Who's the dual? Me. I stared at that last line for a while. She was the last lock between him and 456,000. At 9:30, I walked into the break room just as he was finishing his coffee. He looked up, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Daniel," he said, "you got a minute?" He didn't wait for me to answer. He led me into the hallway, lowered his voice. "I know what you've been doing," he said. "The flags, the emails, the little anonymous messages to auditors. Clever. But you don't understand how this works." He stepped closer. "I built this team. I can unbuild it just as easily. So here's how it's going to go. You're going to rescind that flag, tell payroll the control was a false positive, and we'll forget this little rebellion. Otherwise, I'll make sure your name goes to HR for system tampering. You'll never work in finance again." I didn't look away. "You done?" He blinked, thrown off by my calm. "What?" "I asked if you're done, because your time is." I walked away before he could respond. He didn't know it yet, but his threat was being recorded. Not by me. By the building's automatic security feed. Every floor conversation within 15 feet of an exit is captured for liability reasons. By 10 a.m., I'd gathered my last piece, a full audit export, showing who authorized each KPI adjustment, when and from which device, his laptop, his credentials, his timestamps. Then I sent the email that would end him. Subject, verification request, compensation revision authorization, to compensation, committeecompany.com. CC, external audit, Hendricks Co. Dear Committee, per section 7.4 and Control 19B, please confirm that KPI modifications implemented under user E. Mercer admin were authorized by the Compensation Committee prior to payroll processing. These changes affected aggregate payouts above the 250K threshold and adjusted the executive multiplier to 1.75. Pending confirmation, payroll has paused disbursements. Regards, Daniel Rhodes, Senior Product Manager. 3 minutes later, Aisha's message popped up. He's yelling. Just tried to call legal. They're not answering. Of course they weren't. The auditors had already reached them. I opened the shared drive and locked the final file. Payroll batch, how to then 45. Final auth PDF. The same document he'd planned to use to sign off his bonus reallocation. Only now, the metadata inside it told a different story. Under last modified by E. Mercer and admin, unauthorized change. Under reviewed by pending compensation committee. Under system note. Flag raised for investigation. That one file was a bomb. At 11:08 a.m., his assistant knocked on my cubicle wall. He wants to see you. Now. I walked into his office. He was standing, tie loosened, color gone from his face. The confidence was cracking. What the hell did you do? He snapped. You've frozen payroll. Do you realize what kind of chaos this causes? I kept my tone measured. No, Eric. You froze it when you broke protocol. The system's just doing its job. He slammed his palm on the desk. I am the system. That was when his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. The color drained further. The auditors, he muttered. Then again. Board committee. He didn't pick up either. I left his office quietly. As I stepped out, I caught Aisha's eye through the glass partition. She mouthed 2 words. It's live. Meaning the auditors had activated real-time compliance mode. Every executive account was now under lock and forensic capture. At 11:45, I saw him pacing, calling someone, whispering. Then his door shut. At 12:03 p.m., all employee monitors blinked. A pop-up from payroll appeared. Notice: compensation disbursement temporarily suspended, pending external review. Estimated duration 24 to 48 hours. The office erupted. Questions, messages, murmurs. He burst out of his office, red-faced. Everyone calm down, he shouted. Just a technical audit. Nothing to worry about. No one believed him. At 12:10, I received an email from the auditors. Thank you for your cooperation. The committee has acknowledged receipt of evidence and initiated inquiry. Please retain all communications. That was it. No drama, no hero music, just a sentence that meant the fuse was lit. At 12:37, I got one more message from Aisha. He just came by payroll. He asked who escalated the flag. I said the system did. Is he angry? I typed. He's scared. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the first real breath I'd taken all week. The office noise had shifted. The whispers were no longer anxious. They were curious, hopeful. Someone finally said it out loud. Do you think they caught him? No one answered. But I knew the truth. He wasn't caught yet. He was cornered. And by Monday morning, he'd learn what happens when a man who thinks he owns the rules meets the people who actually read them. By Monday morning, the air in the office felt electric, too charged, too still. People spoke in lowered tones, eyes darting toward the glass doors of the executive suite. Everyone knew something was happening, but no one dared ask what. The company's Slack channels were eerily quiet. Even the usual good morning emojis had vanished. At 9:01 a.m., an internal message flashed across every monitor. Payroll update. Compensation batch. Reprocessing initiated. At 9:02, our bonuses went from pending to approved. Zeros, gasps, murmurs, curses. The same screen that had shown $456,000 in total team bonuses now displayed a clean white 0. For half a second, everyone froze, and then the shouting began. What the hell? Is this a joke? Did the auditors clear it? From the corner of my eye, I saw movement through the glass. Eric Mercer, my boss, was standing in his office, phone pressed to his ear, face lit by the blue glow of the monitor. His lips moved fast. He was smiling. He'd done it. He'd pushed it through manually. But at 9:07, something happened. He didn't plan for. Across the floor, every payroll-connected workstation pinged with the same pop-up alert. Control 19B triggered. Unauthorized formula. Modification detected. Action. System freeze initiated. Notified parties. External auditor. Compensation committee. Board chair. The sound of those notifications, the endless chime of error tones, spread like a digital alarm. Dozens of monitors flashing red. Then silence. I looked toward the payroll. Aisha was standing, headset still on, hands trembling slightly but eyes steady. She'd flipped the flag. For a full 10 seconds, Mercer didn't move. Then his door flew open. "Who triggered that?" he barked. "Who touched the batch?" No one answered. He stormed toward Aisha's desk, voice rising. You froze it again, didn't you? You realize you've just locked executive compensation across the entire system? Do you have any idea what that means?" Aisha looked up at him, calm as ice. "It means Control 19B works exactly as designed," she said. The room went dead quiet. He leaned closer, lowering his voice to a hiss. "You're finished." Her hand didn't even shake as she replied, "Maybe, but so are you." Security approached before he could say another word. 2 compliance officers, 1 auditor with a clipboard, and the head of HR trailing behind. It was the kind of slow, deliberate walk that meant they already knew. "Mr. Mercer," the lead auditor said evenly, "we need to speak with you privately." His laugh was brittle. "About what? A system glitch?" "About a compensation formula modification performed under your credentials at 8:57 a.m. this morning." He paled. "That's absurd. I didn't—" "We have the session log, sir." They walked him out, his voice trailing behind them. "This is insane. I'm the one who built this system. You can't just—" The elevator doors closed, cutting him off. The floor exhaled as one. Someone clapped softly, then stopped, unsure if it was allowed. By 9:30, a company-wide message arrived from the board's compliance office. Subject: Temporary Executive Suspension. Effective immediately, Executive Director Eric Mercer has been placed on administrative leave, pending investigation into potential compensation irregularities. All inquiries related to payroll or KPI adjustments are to be directed to the Compensation Committee. You could feel the shift. The fear that had hung over us for months was gone, replaced by something else. Quiet disbelief, then a ripple of vindicated laughter. But for me, it wasn't over yet. At 10:12, HR called me in. The director looked exhausted, the kind of man who hadn't slept all weekend. "Daniel," he began, rubbing his temples, "the board knows you were the one who identified the irregularities." "I didn't identify them," I said. "He did. I just read the logs." He almost smiled. "Semantics aside, the committee wants a full timeline from you. Everything you saw, every change he made." I handed him a folder, already printed. "You'll want the metadata from February 24 and March 2. He nodded slowly. "You understand this might turn into a legal matter?" "I'm counting on it." As I left the room, I saw Aisha waiting outside. She gave me a small nod, half gratitude, half warning. At noon, Legal sent a secure update. The external auditors had locked all executive disbursements, including Mercer's accounts. His access badge had been deactivated. IT confirmed that the unauthorized formula change had been initiated from his laptop, using his login, and executed 3 minutes before the payout batch ran. The forensic log was airtight. But the best part? The executive multiplier, the 1.75x he'd given himself, had triggered a compliance threshold tied to the Securities and Exchange Act. The auditors had no choice but to escalate it to the board's legal counsel. This wasn't just a company violation anymore. It was potential fraud. By 2 p.m., word had spread across every department. People who'd once avoided eye contact with me were suddenly stopping by my desk. "Is it true? Are we getting our bonuses back? Did you really catch him?" I just shook my head. "The system did." At 3:15, my email pinged again. Subject line, "Confidential Interim Compensation Review." The first line read, "The board has initiated an emergency audit of all executive compensation for the current fiscal year. Pending outcome, all affected staff will receive provisional credit for withheld bonuses, plus accrued interest." I read that line 3 times. Then I laughed. Out loud. For the first time in months. Because what Eric had turned into a war was now a full-blown board investigation. And he'd fired the first shot at himself. The office lights dimmed around 6, but I stayed late, watching as the system logs updated one last time. Status: Executive Compensation Batch. Locked. Flag: Control 19B. Escalated to board review. The war was over. The cleanup had begun. I shut my laptop, leaned back in the chair, and whispered the same words I had told him in the beginning. "No, Eric. Numbers don't lie. People do." And by tomorrow morning, the numbers would tell the whole story. By Tuesday morning, the building didn't feel like the same place anymore. The man who had once strutted through the halls like he owned the air itself was now nothing more than a whispered headline. Mercer suspended pending investigation. His name had vanished from the executive board display, replaced by a placeholder, interim director, TBD. But power leaves a stain even when it's gone. You could feel his shadow, still clinging to people, that lingering fear that speaking his name might summon him back, except one person didn't seem afraid: AITA. When I walked into the payroll department, she was there, calm as ever, typing methodically while a compliance officer hovered beside her, documenting every keystroke. She looked up, saw me, and smiled faintly. "Morning, Daniel," she said. "Guess we made it through Monday." I handed her a coffee. "You did more than that? You stopped him." She shook her head. "No, the system stopped him. I just didn't look away." Her screen flashed again, another ping from the external auditors. She clicked it open, scanned the content, and exhaled. "You might want to read this." It was a copy of Mercer's final override request, the one he'd tried to push through, minutes before the system froze. 2. Payroll Systems. Subject: Emergency Authorization, Bonus Disbursement Correction. Please execute immediate manual release of pending executive compensation, per verbal confirmation from board liaison. Approval code to follow. E. Mercer. There was no approval code. There was no liaison. Just his desperation in writing. AITA turned the screen slightly toward the auditor. "That's the email," she said quietly. "He called me right after sending it. Told me to bypass the freeze." The auditor nodded, noting every word. "Did he threaten you?" She hesitated, then tapped a button. A recording file opened. Mercer's voice, low and sharp. "If you don't push that payout, I'll make sure you never work in payroll again." The auditor didn't even blink. "That'll do." It was over. He didn't know it yet, but that recording was the bullet. The one thing he couldn't spin, edit, or bury under jargon. By noon, the board had convened a closed-door emergency session. HR, legal, finance, and audit. Everyone in one room. I wasn't invited, but the walls in that building were thin. From my desk, I could hear the muffled rhythm of voices through the vents. Low, tense, then suddenly raised. Mercer's voice, still trying to fight. "Those were draft adjustments. You can't prove intent." Then a calmer, older voice. The board chair. "You altered a locked compensation formula under your credentials and instructed staff to falsify authorization. That is intent." Silence. Half an hour later, the door opened. Mercer stepped out, pale, jacket half-buttoned, security trailing close behind. He didn't look at anyone, didn't even try to collect his things, just walked out, slow, stiff, defeated. The war was over. The king had fallen. But the fallout was just beginning. By 2 p.m., an official memo hit every inbox. Subject: Compensation audit results. Immediate action. Following an internal and external review, all withheld performance bonuses will be reissued within 48 hours, with 5% compensatory interest. Effective immediately, Eric Mercer has been terminated for cause due to violation of compensation and audit compliance protocols. All related documentation has been submitted to Regulatory Counsel for review. When I read it, I didn't smile. Not yet. Not until I scrolled to the bottom and saw the final line. Special commendation to payroll specialist Aisha Rahman for procedural integrity and cooperation during the review. She'd finally been seen. At 3K, my manager from another department stopped by my desk. "You're a legend, man," he whispered. "The way you played that? Unreal. They're saying the board's considering promoting you." I shook my head. "Not interested." He blinked. "You're kidding." "No, I didn't do this for a title. I did it so none of us ever have to sit through another one of his speeches again." He laughed softly. "Still, that was some revenge." I didn't answer. Revenge wasn't the right word. It wasn't rage that brought Mercer down. It was precision, patience, documentation. He wanted to win a war of power. I fought a war of paper, and paper doesn't forget. By Wednesday morning, the payout confirmations started rolling in. People were crying, literally crying at their desks. For some, it meant rent. For others, months of debt finally cleared. For all of us, it meant proof. The company could still choose fairness over fear. Aisha stopped by my cubicle that afternoon holding her phone. "They reinstated my bonus too," she said. "First time in 3 years I've actually gotten one." "You earned it," I said. "Every cent." She hesitated, then added, "They're inviting me to present at the board review tomorrow. They want me to explain Control 19B, how it works." "Good," I said. "Let them see who really saved them." She smiled, the kind that comes from deep relief, not pride. "You think he'll ever understand what happened?" I leaned back, thought about it. "He will," I said, "every time he tries to cash a severance check that says 0. The next morning she stood before the board, quiet, composed, the same woman Mercer once called just payroll. Now the same system he'd tried to override was the one immortalizing her name in policy. Later that day, Legal published the final audit summary. Mercer's unauthorized KPI change led to a $456,000 misallocation attempt. His override request triggered Control 19B, locking all executive disbursements. Evidence submitted included email authorization falsification, threat recordings, and session logs. Recommendation: immediate termination, permanent loss of severance, full clawback of prior year's bonuses. Reading it felt like closing a book I'd carried too long. But the real ending came in the last paragraph. A permanent procedural amendment has been introduced to prevent unilateral KPI revisions. The amendment will be known internally as the Rahman Rule. I stared at that line until it blurred. The Rahman Rule. The woman he dismissed as a background name was now a line in company law. By Thursday evening, Mercer's office was empty. Security had boxed his things. The blinds were drawn, and for the first time since I joined the company, the air on that floor felt breathable. The beatdown he never saw coming didn't come from me. It came from the system he'd thought he owned, and the people he'd thought didn't matter. And the beauty of it? We didn't need to shout. We just needed to let the numbers speak. 2 weeks later, the building didn't sound the same. No more clipped heels echoing through the marble hallway. No more forced pep talks about efficiency bonuses. For the first time in years, you could hear laughter coming from finance. Real laughter, the kind that comes from a place finally allowed to breathe. Eric Mercer's name had been scrubbed from every system, every file, every memo. But the ghost of his arrogance still lingered in small ways, like the faint smell of cologne that refused to leave the executive boardroom carpet. The company didn't send an email announcing his termination. They didn't need to. Everyone already knew. What they did send, though, was something better. A new document. The Transparent Compensation Policy, version 2.0. It was built on 3 rules I recognized two of them instantly. They were mine. The third, Aisha's. 1. No retroactive KPI changes without recorded committee vote. 2. All formula modifications require dual authentication, one from finance, one from payroll. 3. Any violation automatically triggers Control 19B, an external audit notification. They called it the new standard. I called it justice on paper. When I opened the file, I noticed something that stopped me cold. At the bottom, in small gray text, framework adapted from internal compliance proposal, drafted by D. Rhodes and A. Rahman. They'd named us both. A week later, HR asked me to meet with the board. I expected another formal review, maybe even a scolding for bypassing protocol, but when I walked into the room, there were only 5 people waiting. The chairwoman, the CFO, 2 legal counsels, and Aisha, sitting at the far end of the table. The chairwoman smiled, the kind that carried weight and warmth at once. "Daniel," she said, "you've done something most people never attempt. You took down a man abusing power without burning the house with him inside. That takes discipline." I stayed quiet. The CFO slid a folder across the table. "We'd like you to step in as interim director for the department. Effective immediately." I didn't even open it. "No." The room went silent. The chairwoman raised an eyebrow. "No? I'm not interested in sitting in his chair," I said. "I just want to make sure no one else ever gets crushed under one like it." They exchanged glances. Then the chairwoman nodded slowly. "Then what do you want?" I turned to Aisha. She looked at me, cautious, curious. "I want transparency to be built into the system itself," I said. "Not buried in PDFs no one reads. I want live dashboards showing every KPI, every formula, every vote. I want employees to see the math in real time. And I want her," I gestured toward Aisha, "to oversee it." The CFO frowned slightly. "You mean give payroll veto power over compensation?" "Exactly," I said. "The people who push the buttons should have the right to stop the wrong ones from being pressed." Silence again. Then slowly the chairwoman smiled. "You know, that might be the smartest idea we've heard all quarter." By the end of that week, Aisha had a new title, Director of Compensation Integrity. Her salary tripled, and for the first time, payroll wasn't under HR anymore. It reported directly to the board. The first thing she did in her new role was small, almost invisible, but poetic. She renamed Control 19B. It was now called Mercer Lock, a quiet digital scar that would live inside the system forever. The following Monday, I found myself in the same conference room where Mercer had once humiliated me. The same one with the glass walls and 2 bright lights. But this time, I wasn't reading fake KPIs off a spreadsheet. I was presenting the new dashboard. On the screen behind me, numbers updated in real time. Bonuses, targets, approvals, all transparent, all time-stamped, all public. No more dark edits, no more midnight formulas, no more power games. When I finished, the room erupted in applause, but I barely heard it. My eyes were fixed on the far corner where Aisha stood, arms folded, smiling quietly. After the meeting, she caught up with me in the hallway. "You realize what you've done, right?" "What's that?" I asked. "You made honesty contagious." We went downstairs to the lobby cafe, the same place where I'd sat months ago, drinking burnt coffee and planning the war. Now it felt like a victory debrief. She stirred her tea absently. "Do you ever think about him?" "Mercer?" She nodded. I thought for a moment. "Sometimes. Not out of anger, though. More like curiosity. I wonder what he tells himself when he looks in the mirror." She smiled. "Probably that someone else wrote the rules." I laughed softly. "Maybe, but he'll remember them." She tilted her head. "Why?" "Because his severance package says 0. We both laughed, then really laughed, the kind of laugh that carries relief, not revenge. As we left the cafe, I glanced back at the glass building towering above us, the same place where I'd once felt small, replaceable, invisible. Now it looked different. not because it had changed, but because I had. He turned $456,000 into a war. We turned it into a rule book, and the only casualty was arrogance. That night, long after everyone had gone home, I walked past the now empty executive office. The nameplate was gone. The lights were off. But I paused anyway, whispering into the dark, "You made it a war, Eric, but you forgot? Wars don't belong to kings. They belong to survivors." Then I closed the door for the last time.